All right. So now we're looking at a new phase in Georgia history. And this particular phase is called Westward expansion. So this is post American Revolution. So as I'm going through this video, I'm gonna break it up into two parts. So this part we're just looking at strictly the University of Georgia and the Georgia state capitals. So for the Georgia state capitals, on your organizer, all you're gonna do is write the city in which I present them to you next to the letter. So today I am learning how to explain the reasons for the establishment of the University of Georgia and for the westward movement of Georgia capitals, so that I can explain the significant factors that affected westward expansion in Georgia between 1789 and 1840. And I'll know I have it when I can explain the reasons for the establishment of UGA, explain the reasons for the westward movement of Georgia's capitals, and give the order of the capital movement. So first, let's take a look at the University of Georgia, or as again I'm gonna call this video UGA. So now we won the American Revolution. We set up America. We talked about Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, the U.S. Constitution, all of that good stuff. So now we're here. And during all of this time, many Georgians were not very well educated. Many of them, if they had any, had an elementary school education at best. So there was a strong desire for our Georgians to get more educated, and to do that, the state of Georgia, or specifically this man here, Abraham Baldwin, and who should look familiar because remember he was one of the signers of the Constitution on the behalf of Georgia. He wrote a charter, and remember, a charter is basically saying outlining why you want to do something. So think about the Charter of 1732 when James Oglethorpe basically gave all the reasons why Georgia was founded. It's the same thing here. So he wrote a charter out basically outlining why there was a need for a university here in Georgia. And in the charter, he said that all people, not just wealthy people, should have a right to education. So UGA would be what you consider a land grant university. And a land grant university is basically a university where the federal government has donated land for educational purposes. So UGA, after the federal government donated land to set up UGA, so UGA was the first state-sponsored or state-supported, university in the United States. Which kind of set the tone for other universities we have today. So it took a minute before UGA actually opened its doors, but it did finally open its doors in 1801. So the first actual college to hold classes was called the Franklin College, which is still there today. And over the years, UGA kept getting more and more actually school buildings and classes they offered. So this is like a current picture of UGA, or at least a stadium where they hold their football games. So UGA is still very much active and running. It's located in Athens, Georgia. And UGA is very much different from Georgia State University. UGA is in Athens. Georgia State University is in Atlanta. They're totally different universities. So remember in the first, or not remember, but in the first early stages of UGA, actually letting students in, only white males were allowed to actually go to UGA early on. So although Abraham Baldwin said everybody had a right to education, not just the wealthy, it was limitations to who they actually let in. So it wasn't until 1918 where they actually allowed women to actually attend the university. And it wasn't until 1961 where they actually allowed blacks to attend. So the two first black students to actually integrate UGA were Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes. So this is a picture here of Charlene Hunter, and this is a picture here of Hamilton Holmes. And if you live in the Atlanta area near any of the MARTA train stations, it's one station called H.E. Holmes Station. It's named after him. So the fun fact there. So now let's look at the Georgia capitals. So Georgia had many capitals before the one we know today being Atlanta. And on the first capital Georgia ever had, and you're going to write this by the S, is Savannah. So to kind of keep it simple, the capitals kept moving because the population kept moving. So after the population, for first Savannah was state population. The first capital And then the population started moving west, which they ended up living in Augusta. So that became the second capital. So by A, you're going to write Augusta. So again, the population kept moving west, and we ended up here in Louisville. So we ended up in Louisville for a few years. And again, the population kept moving west, but also in Louisville, there was a malaria outbreak. So then we moved again to Milledgeville, which is what you're going to write by your M. So Milledgeville, we stayed in Milledgeville for like 60 years, but it wasn't until the Civil War and the Sherman's March to Sea that destroyed the city that we ended up having to move again. And after Milledgeville, we end up here in Atlanta, which is the final spot and our current state capital. So by A, you're going to write Atlanta. And Atlanta became the final capital because, again, the population moved here and kind of settled here. But also, Atlanta was very big on railroads. And later on in the second part, we're going to take a look at why those railroads was impactful to Georgia and especially the growth of Georgia history. All right, we're going to stop here and we will pick back up in part two.